Hey, groovy kind of love. That's what we have in our gospel text for today. So, Terry Waller was a missionary among the Bolivian and Ethiopian people over the years, and he developed a program called Water for All. Water for All, that allowed local farmers to drill wells without electricity. And before moving to those countries, he was a dry land rancher outside of San Angelo, Texas. And he learned how to farm and ranch with relatively little water. He took this innovative mindset with him to train local people in a trade so they could drill wells better than he. He had small co-ops called water clubs that built ownership, within the community. And these clubs gave him a forum to teach the gospel through oral storytelling. And Terry understood his primary goal as a missionary was not to be a hero, but to train people to succeed him. In the Easter season, we often think of, resurrection as something that comes upon us and happens solely to us. It strengthens our faith and it moves us forward along the path. But then there is another move of the resurrection. It's the one that we go through. We decide to walk through the doors that the resurrection opens. Just as God's angel rolled the stone away from the tomb and opened the door of new life, so the resurrection continues to open doors today. We train new leaders to carry on the work. Resurrection creates a succession plan in the church. In our world, the idea of succession plan is often accompanied by greed, intrigue, and power games. Sometimes a new president comes to power and tries to shock and awe the system with massive changes, or a company merges. People are laid off, some are enriched, others are denied. Or in the case of the parody show Succession, greed swallows a family. Not so with the church. Succession planning strengthens the hearts and lives of the people and really spreads the gospel. Passing the baton from one generation of believers to another is not always smooth or easy, and it's sometimes, comes along with suffering, but the process reveals who the leaders are and prepares the church for the work ahead. In other words, we're always working on a succession plan and asking, who's going to follow us here? For instance, in the readings for today, the apostles saw that one of the primary responsibilities in each place they visited was to train and appoint people who could be leaders. They did not keep leadership and authority just to themselves. They didn't grab it to themselves. Instead, when their feet hit the ground in a new place, they scouted around for whom the Spirit gifted, who's going to be the one who's going to shepherd the community after them. In Acts, Paul and Barnabas appointed elders in Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch. And in John, Jesus prepares his disciples for his departure and explains the ethic of love that will keep their community going. In Revelation, we have a vision of a purpose of succession planning, a new heaven and a new earth descending to continue Christ's reign. Peter Stenke reminds us that the purpose of the church is not to be one's church home or extended family. It is not to survive by obtaining more people for support at the base. The purpose is to invite people to be part of the mission of the church. That's why we read our mission statement. Reception into the church is a threshold toward involvement in the mission of the church. And the task of the church is not to accumulate just attendees, pew sitters. It's a school for developing agents of new creation among those who are the beneficiaries of God's grace. This work does not discourage the church. Often when people depart from a church today or move to another place and move away, sometimes people feel, we as a church did something wrong. When Paul and Barnabas moved to another community, they knew they had done something right. They were strong enough to have their own leadership as he left them. They had their own leadership and were not dependent on Paul and Barnabas anymore, the lead apostles. The resurrection, well, it's a door of faith flung open by the winds of the Spirit. The interesting thing about these doors is they're not for the purpose of bettering a church or making the church bigger. They're for strengthening the faith of the believers and preparing the church for additional decisions and maybe even suffering. And the question for us is, how do we become the kind of people who walk through these open doors? In other words, how do we open doors not for ourselves, but for others? We need a succession plan. Begin with your own personal journey through the doors of the gospel. Paul and Barnabas experienced hardship and suffering at the hands of the Jews and the Gentiles. And they were looking for people who went through similar difficulties. I mean, who is better to help somebody through a difficult situation than someone who's been there? Just reflect on your own journey. Keep in mind that Jesus never gave up on those opposed to him or who did not understand him. He continued to offer them opportunities to right to the end. Yes, to right the relationship. His love could even reach the Roman procurator Pilate, with whom he engaged in a lengthy conversation, as he had done with Nicodemus, the Samaritan woman, the man born blind, Martha and Mary. And in those instances, there was an openness that eventually resulted in faith. Even though Pilate ultimately rejected Jesus' love, Jesus nonetheless offered it. Jesus does not only give the disciples the gift of his love, but he also commands them to do as he has done. He has shown his love by acting it out, pouring out himself into the service of others. When we see Jesus' love in action, it becomes evident how love can be commanded just by watching his actions. We saw how Jesus loved and talked and walked with and instructed those who were to carry on in his absence. Disciples are learners and apostles are sent. So you have to learn first before you're sent. And sometimes love develops after action. It's not, we tend to think of fuzzy feelings, and love is really your action of what you do for other people. And Jesus, he really expected that our circles of friendships, that they would widen to include people with whom, well, maybe we find it difficult to love, like, whatever, include. That's how we expand our circle, and we train our replacements. The culture of McDonald's Corporation has always been more than French fries and hamburgers. One simple motto they abide by is to train your replacement. In Christian circles, we know what that's called. It's called discipleship. The church grows through an apprenticeship program of teaching and shadowing and growing and learning and going. If you were to walk away, who would take up on the work that you're doing? Everyone is replaceable, and a healthy Christian looks for others to take the mantle of leadership. They prayed, they fasted, they prepared themselves. Who is the person you are pouring into and strengthening to walk in your footsteps someday? So you measure and report success by the doors you have opened for others. We view success in the church not by how many people come or families you reach or children that are baptized. notice how many doors others are able to walk through because of our work. Paul and Barnabas discussed the doors that were open to the Gentiles and how the Spirit had broken barriers for people to walk through. The stories prepared them for further adventures of the Spirit in their lives. And when Terry Waller returned to the States, the people in Bolivia and Ethiopia were strong enough to carry on the work without him and to even make it better. Villages had clean water, and the gospel was preached in areas that did not even have a Bible in their own language. That's a door worth walking through. And the church said, Amen.